More than a century ago, one woman's name sent shivers through France. Was Jeanne Weber a monstrous killer or a tragic victim of circumstance and medical ignorance? Tonight we revisit a case that still sparks debate. In an age before forensic science, when medicine was as much guesswork as knowledge, how did a grieving mother become the most feared woman in France? And what can her story teach us about the line between fact and rumour, a question as relevant now as it was then? She was called the Ogress. Children died in her arms, but was Jeanne Weber truly a serial killer or a victim of tragic coincidence? Let's unravel the mystery. We'll explore the facts, the rumours, and the lasting impact of one of France's darkest chapters, piecing together a story that is part history, part cautionary tale. Jeanne Weber, born on October 7th, 1874, in a small fishing village in northern France, would become one of the country's most notorious serial killers, ultimately earning the grim nickname, the Ogress. Her life was marked by hardship from an early age. At 14, she left her home for Paris, where she worked a series of menial jobs, before marrying in 1893. Her husband struggled with alcoholism, and by 1905, 2 of their 3 children had died. Jeanne herself was also drinking heavily, and the family lived in poverty in a rundown Paris tenement. The first signs of something sinister emerged in March 1905. While babysitting her sister-in-law's 18-month-old daughter, Georgette, the child suddenly died. Though there were strange bruises on the girl's neck, the physician dismissed them, and Jeanne was invited to babysit again. A week later, 2-year-old Suzanne, another niece, died in Jeanne's care, but her death was attributed to convulsions. The pattern continued. Later that month, Jeanne was looking after her brother's daughter, Germaine, who suffered a choking episode but survived. The next day, Germaine died, with diphtheria cited as the cause. Just days later, Jeanne's own son, Marcel, also died, again with suspicious marks on his neck overlooked by doctors. On April 5, 1905, Jeanne invited 2 sisters-in-law to dinner and stayed home with her 10-year-old nephew, Maurice, while the others went shopping. They returned unexpectedly to find Maurice gasping for breath, his neck bruised with Jeanne standing over him. This time suspicions were raised. Jeanne was charged and her trial began in January 1906, with the prosecution alleging she had killed 8 children, including her own. Yet, defended by the skilled lawyer Henri Robert, and with expert testimony suggesting natural causes, Jeanne was acquitted in February 1906. After her release, Jeanne vanished for over a year. She resurfaced in 1907 in Villedieu, working under the name Madame Moulinet. There, 9-year-old Auguste Bavouzet died in her care, again with bruises on his neck. Initially, the death was ruled as convulsions, but when Jeanne's true identity was discovered, a second autopsy found evidence of strangulation. Nevertheless, she was released after another legal technicality, Jeanne Weber's chilling crime timeline. On March 2nd, 1905, while babysitting for her sister-in-law, Jeanne Weber was present when 18-month-old Georgette suddenly became ill and died. Although the child had unusual bruises on her neck, the doctor overlooked them. Just days later, on March 11, Weber was invited to babysit again. This time, 2-year-old Suzanne did not survive her care, but the attending physician attributed her death to mysterious convulsions. On March 25th, while babysitting her brother's daughter, Jeanne Weber witnessed 7-year-old Germaine suddenly begin choking, with red marks appearing on her throat. Although the child survived this frightening incident, she was not as lucky the next day when Weber returned. This time Germaine died. Doctors attributed her death, and that of Weber's own son Marcel, just 4 days later, to diphtheria. Yet again the suspicious marks of strangulation were overlooked. On April 5, 1905, Jeanne Weber invited 2 of her sisters-in-law to dinner and stayed behind with her 10-year-old nephew, Maurice, while the others went shopping. When they returned unexpectedly, they found Maurice struggling to breathe on the bed, his throat covered in bruises, with Jeanne standing over him, her expression wild and disturbed. Charges were quickly filed, and Weber's trial began on January 29, 1906. The prosecution accused her of 8 murders, including all 3 of her own children and 2 others, Lucy Alejandre and Marcel Poyatos, who had died while in her care. It was even suggested that Weber killed her own son in March to divert suspicion from herself. However, with the skilled Henri Robert as her defense attorney and jurors hesitant to condemn a grieving mother, Weber was acquitted on February 6th. August 1905, Jeanne Weber was accused by her own relatives of strangling her 2 children, one 7 years old, the other just a 3-month-old baby. She was acquitted. January 1906, she faced charges for the murders of her 3 nieces, Suzanne, aged 3, Georgette, 18 months, and Germaine, 7 months, and for the attempted murder of her 11-month-old nephew, Maurice. Again, she was acquitted. 14 months later, on April 7th, 1907, a doctor in the town of Villedieu was called to the home of a peasant named Bavouzet. He was met by the babysitter, known as Madame Moulinet, who showed him the body of 9-year-old Auguste Bavouzet, lying dead in his cot with severe bruising on his throat. The death was initially attributed to convulsions, but the doctor reconsidered his diagnosis on May 4th, after discovering that Madame Moulinet was actually Jeanne Weber. Once again, Weber enlisted the defense of Henri Robert. Though she was held for trial, Weber was released in December when a second autopsy ruled that typhoid was the cause of the boy's death. Weber soon disappeared from public view, resurfacing as an orderly at a children's hospital in Faucombeau. She later moved to the children's home in Orgeville, managed by friends determined to make up for the wrongs justice had done to an innocent woman. Using the alias Marie Lemoine, Weber worked there for less than a week before she was caught in the act of strangling a child. The owners quietly dismissed her, and the incident was swiftly covered up. January 1908, accused of murdering 9-year-old Augusto Bavouzet, acquitted once more. May 1908, accused of killing 7-year-old Marcel Poirot. In every case except the last, authorities struggled to determine the exact cause of death. Some victims showed only faint marks on their necks, while others had no visible injuries at all. Medical experts disagreed. Some believed Weber suffocated her victims by pressing on their chests, while others insisted she was simply a victim of tragic coincidences. But with the death of Marcel Poirot, the circumstances were far more damning. The tragedy unfolded in Commercy, eastern France, where Jeanne Weber, using an alias, arrived with a male companion. The 2 rented a room in the Poirot household. After the man left, Weber, claiming she was afraid to sleep alone, asked if young Marcel could stay with her. Although the boy was reluctant, his parents eventually persuaded him. That night, a neighbour named Madame Grellet heard strange sobs and muffled screams coming from Weber's room. Alarmed, she woke Marcel's parents and together they entered the room, only to find the boy dead in bed, his head thrown back, eyes bulging, and tongue bitten and bleeding. Jeanne Weber was found asleep beside the body, her nightclothes stained with blood. When confronted, she appeared dazed and claimed she didn't know what had happened. A police search uncovered 3 blood-stained, knotted handkerchiefs in the bed and attempts to clean blood off the floor. One of the 4 doctors who examined Marcel's body described the killer as a human vampire, a term rarely used outside of fiction. Jeanne Weber's true identity only came to light after her arrest. Authorities, now certain of her guilt, rushed to bring her to trial. Jeanne Weber's repeated acquittals, despite mounting evidence, left authorities and the public stunned until the tragic and undeniable death of Marcel Poirot finally brought her dark secrets into the open. Awaiting trial for murder, Jeanne Weber was declared insane on October 25, 1908, and committed to the Maréville Asylum. Believed responsible for at least 10 deaths, she spent 2 years institutionalized before ending her own life by strangulation in 1910. Jeanne Weber's story remains one of the most chilling chapters in French criminal history, a tale of overlooked warning signs, tragic failures of justice, and a woman whose crimes haunted every community she entered. Her case haunted the public imagination and left a lasting mark on how authorities would investigate crimes against children for decades to come. If you were shocked by these stories and want to know more about the hidden crimes lurking in the shadows, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Every week we uncover new stories that you won't find anywhere else. Don't miss out. Join us as we dig deeper into the darkest corners of the criminal world.